Geopolitics, Nigeria's inadequacies birthed indigenous people of Biafra. Geopolitics is the term used in describing the impact politics and international relations exert on Earth's geography. In other words, it is a measure of how factors such as location, climate, topography, natural resources and borders influence the power, foreign policy, and interactions between countries and continents. But for a layman, it is the struggle for control of land, territories, maritime spaces, natural resources like oil and gas or water, and strategic locations like shipping lanes. The first inorganic geopolitics against Africa by a group of geographically located countries was the commissioning of slave trade. It objectively condemned Africans to a cheap labor, to work the plantations, and a commodity to be transacted. As industrialization loomed large and slavery became economically unsustainable, the Berlin Conference of 1884-1885 was hatched. The primary aim was the balkanization of Africa into colonies for extractive minerals for export. After WW2, a wave of Pan-Africanism swept across Africa. To pacify it, the colonialists left, but socially engineered a fractured independent African countries. The CIA and MI6 surgically murdered nationalist African leaders, or ousted them through a bloody coup, or imposed a self-hating Stockholm syndrome displaying leader groomed to be pro-West. In extreme instances, a combination of these and economically sabotaging war are used. In the case of Nigeria, as an emerging economic powerhouse, the socially engineered division was anchored on religious and tribal acrimony. The inadequate formation of one Nigeria between the predominantly Christian South and the predominantly Muslim North, despite their cultural diversity, was a cheap geopolitical point, made intentionally. Nigeria was never created to work for the indigenous people, but rather to be a source of cheap raw materials. It was a trade-off between invaders. One needed a land to dwell, while the other wanted unfettered access to minerals. It was a win-win for them. Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, IPOB, made Biafrans aware of the term geopolitics. It was during his broadcasts on Radio Biafra that he explained in the most simple form how the Gulf of Guinea, Bight of Biafra, is strategic as a world trade route, how the pharmaceutical and food industrial complex vested in genetically modified organisms, GMOs, like Bayer and Monsanto, use the Fulani terrorists' herdsmen to kill natural or organic farmers. How Biafra, genocidal war, militancy and terrorism are geopolitical cards played for controlling Biafra oil and gas. IPOB, through her Biafra education awareness, is informing Biafrans that it is not enough to draw a religious conclusion emotionally just because the Fulani terrorists shout Allahu Akbar. Granted, Islam is not wanted in our land. It has to be said that even though Christians are the most butchered and brutalized, indigenous Nupe and Hausa Muslims in Niger, Zamfara and Sokoto states, for example, are not spared. This will tell you that Fulani terrorists' herdsmen do not have a religion, but use Islam as a cover. After all, the AES countries are indigenous Muslims, yet the Fulani terrorists' herdsmen are socially engineered for geopolitical gains by external forces against those countries. Therefore, Biafrans must begin to look beyond religion, but instead observe motive tethered on geopolitics. The simple message of IPOB is that one Nigeria is a geopolitical talking point. One Nigeria is irredeemably fractured, socially retrogressive, and culturally repulsive. IPOB is uncompromisingly insisting that the only way out of the quagmire enveloping the indigenous peoples trapped in the burial ground called One Nigeria is a total dissolution through referendum. One Nigeria is unsalvageable and an inadequacy that gave birth to IPOB. Family Writers, Press International.